Oh hey guys, I just got back from seeing the new Star Wars movie The Last Jedi, and wow, what a ride! You know, I had some real misgivings about Disney buying the franchise, especially after The Force Awakens, while competently made, stuck a bit too close to the plot of A New Hope for my liking. But now that I've seen The Last Jedi, wowee, I mean it's not perfect, but it's certainly the breath of fresh air that this franchise needs. I can't wait for every Star Wars fan to join hands and walk forwards as one into a bold new era of franchise filmmaking. Everything is going to be great forever now. I just can't wait. Not to get political, but it's hard to believe that it's only been 5 years since large sections of the internet became unusable, since Rian Johnson became an obsessive hate figure for certain terminally online individuals who soil their diapers whenever they see a woman on their TVs for more than 3 seconds. And lo, I hear some of you sprinting to the comments right now to inform me that this is slander and you have legitimate criticisms of this film actually, and please take your keyboards out of your mouths, my friends, because so do I. Obviously, not everyone who has a less than 100% positive or even an outright negative opinion of this film is part of the baying mob who hurled racist abuse at actors like Kelly Marie Tran and John Boyega. I just feel that I need to clarify, much as I do when I talk about Jodie Whittaker's Doctor Who era, that I'm going to be discussing actual things in this video, like plot and character, and not just blaming the tofu-eating wokerati for ruining this film franchise that's more than 50% bad. Fun fact, the only film I've ever seen in an empty cinema was the 2008 Clone Wars movie. In the Hatfield Odeon, no one can hear you scream. Anyway, now that I've said that, I'm sure that several people have clicked off the video because I'm biased, to which I say, everyone has bias, dipshit. It came free with the blinding terror of being alive. To everyone else who's decided to stick around, why not subscribe, like the video, promise me your firstborn, and don't deliberately get with an ugly person just so I end up with an ugly child, because I'll know. So anyway, if we're going to define The Last Jedi's vibe by just one word, I think it's going to have to be subversion. The film isn't just breaking with Star Wars tradition, it's actively responding to and critiquing those traditions. It wants to interrogate the nostalgia that the franchise is built on and the common tropes we've seen throughout it, like the master and student relationship or the villainous redemption arc. Writer and director Rian Johnson is most commonly accused online by extremely normal people of two things. One, ruining the franchise, which... Look, if the combo trade negotiation drama / intergalactic minstrel show that was Phantom Menace couldn't tank this thing, nothing can.
You are in big doo-doo this time.
And secondly, that he doesn't care at all about the fans. And on that last one, I kind of agree, actually. The Last Jedi, whatever you think of the actual quality, is undoubtedly a movie largely uninterested in listening to what Star Wars fans think should be in a Star Wars movie. Which is pretty weird. I mean, you'd think that a Star Wars movie written by online Star Wars fans would be pretty good, right? Hey, why don't I try on my handy imagination specs I've got here and see exactly what that would be like?
You are a Palpatine.
So in this video, I want to look at exactly how The Last Jedi ignores delivering cheap fan service and instead manages to create what I consider to be the best of the sequel trilogy and overall one of the better Star Wars movies. For the sake of organisation, we'll examine each character's plotline one by one, starting with Daddy. So in The Last Jedi, our main trio are all split off into their own little plots that coalesce at the end, and out of these, I think that Poe is given the shortest narrative straw. That doesn't mean that I think his character arc is all bad, it actually has a really interesting premise. Because The Last Jedi effectively begins with the kind of huge battle that would go in the third act of most other Star Wars movies. Poe leads a death-defying charge against a First Order dreadnought and pulls off feats of daring do in defiance of his cautious commanding officer to destroy it. It's got heroic sacrifices, cool X-Wing maneuvers, the token funny droid of our main character doing token funny droid things. But like I said, the movie begins with this, and so we see the real consequences of Poe's recklessness. Yes, one dreadnought has been destroyed, but so is the Resistance's entire bombing fleet, and the First Order are still about to kill them all anyway. As Leia so succinctly tells Poe right after she demotes him,
"There were heroes on that mission. Dead heroes."
This is the beginning of Poe's arc. He must learn that war isn't a game and that pulling off death-defying heroics like this without properly considering how you're putting everyone else's lives at risk is a massively selfish thing to do and no way to be a leader. Then because you're probably getting bored by all this talking in your space film, you child, the First Order shows up to destroy part of the command ship and... Look, I've seen post after post defending this, but I'm just going to say it. This is goofy, alright? And I don't mean it conflicts with the law or whatever. I mean that Leia Cirque du Soleil her way back to the ship is an image that cannot be made unhilarious. Just look at Grandma Organa go. And I, of course, would never watch a science fiction franchise that had anything even remotely silly in it. That's just not who I am. Oh boy, that means it's 3:15. Time to watch Meglos again. awful. So the First Order attack actually removes Leia from most of this movie, a creative decision which I honestly go back and forth on, mostly because I think this series is sorely lacking actual Leia-Kylo interaction, and by interaction I mean a 10-minute uninterrupted beatdown. In her place we get Admiral Holdo, who is probably the most contentious character of the movie, and I know for a damn fact that it's because of the dyed hair. I admittedly have very flimsy evidence for this, but I honestly think that if they had brought Holdo out wearing something like the Mon Mothma trim, the hate she got would have halved. You see, right-wing Star Wars fans are sort of like T-Rexes. Their vision is based on colour and movement, and so when they see someone with dyed hair, they just scream, "Woke SJW," without really knowing what they're yelling at. And therein, my friends, lies the tool to their vanquishing. So I haven't been sleeping very well lately. Poe is immediately suspicious of Holdo, as she doesn't seem to have a concrete plan to escape the First Order, and rejects Poe's attempts to find out what's going on. We only find out later that her and Leia's plan all along was to distract the First Order with the Resistance command ship while sending undetectable transports full of evacuated Resistance personnel to a nearby planet where they could hide and wait for the danger to pass. I'll go into this in more detail later, but Poe manages to f*** this up and get almost all the transports destroyed, but it's obviously not a war crime because, you know, he's hot. Mind your business. Now, I can absolutely see what Rian Johnson was going for with this plotline, and I do like the idea. Again, it's the subversion of a classic Star Wars and action movie formula, the cautious and unsure adventurer turned hotshot risk-taking hero. But here, Poe has to learn to pull back when it's needed, to be more cautious and learn to care about defending the people around him more than risking their lives for his own personal glory. To conclude, my main criticism with this storyline is that the message gets a little muddled and in parts kind of ends up being you should always blindly listen to authority even if it looks like they have no idea what they're doing, because they definitely always do have a very clever plan to save us all, which for a movie that came out in 2017 and one that we're looking back on from 2022 is
It's hopeless. It isn't going to get any better. No matter where I turn, there's no escape. The suffering is unbearable.
Also, I guess from a plot standpoint, after he sends Finn and Rose to Canto Bight, Poe just doesn't have a whole lot to do for a while, apart from stand around on the ship coping and seething at Holdo. Like, he definitely feels pushed to the background. Speaking of, so John Boyega has previously spoken out about how the white characters of Kylo Ren and Rey were given more prominence and more nuance in this movie compared to the people of colour in the cast. And now, it is my solemn duty, as the whitest person to ever walk the earth, to give you my thoughts on his thoughts. Point 1. The Oxford English Dictionary defines race. He's right. Of course he's right. And these pages are all blank. Get misinformationed, bro. While Finn's character arc is better handled than Poe's, it's still suffering from being slightly underbaked. I know some people think that this was the wrong direction to take him in entirely, since his plot arc in this movie deals with him deciding whether or not to fight for the Resistance, and supposedly he was already doing that in Force Awakens. But I think in that movie he's actually just like me for real, in that events are just sort of happening to him and he only has a real say in them towards the end. And it makes total sense to me that this child soldier would be sick of the war and eager to run away, which is also where I feel his plot really falls short. It doesn't tap into Finn's backstory enough. But let's put a pin in that for now. Ow! So after Finn wakes up from his tussle with the least insane MCR fan in the last movie, he immediately wants to go looking for Rey, but is stopped from getting in the escape pod by new character Rose Tycho. They both get recruited by Poe into his plan to shut down the tracking thingy on the space Nazi ship without Holdo finding out. Or I guess the Empire was the space Nazis, so now the First Order is like space Stormfront, but if they had a bigger army and more resources than some major world governments, and it's never really clarified whether they've taken over the galaxy properly now or what, and wow, you really cannot blame Ryan for a good chunk of this, can you?
What was the reason?
I had a reason.
What was the reason?
I had a reason.
What was the reason?
I just explained the reason.
What was the reason, bitch?
So to shut down the First Order tracker, Finn and Rose need to find a master codebreaker on Canto Bight, which turns out to be a wretched hive of scum and villainy awash with war profiteers and slavery profiteers, and this little freak is probably big into crypto or something too. And again, props to Rian Johnson for interrogating something that I haven't really seen examined in these movies before, the wars in Star Wars. How they impact individual people and wider societies, who wins and loses not just on the battlefield, the actual consequences and scars that conflicts can leave on such a massive scale.
Oh, but Owen, you forgot about that one cartoon episode out of 3 million where Glorp Bunto goes to
I'm in your walls. No, go ahead, finish your point. Or don't. I'll hear either way. I've heard a lot of people say a certain thing about this plotline, and I really find myself agreeing more and more every time I watch The Last Jedi. Rose is a good character, okay? She brings a lot of heart to the movie. This should have been Poe and Finn. It should have been a faux Famran special. Poe's whole deal is that he's a gung-ho pilot who thinks that war is just a bit of fun, and there would be few better ways for changing his outlook on that than hanging out with the guy who was abducted by the Fash from outer space and forced to serve in their Empire Tribute Act. Meanwhile, Finn, who is sick of war and wants to run away from fighting, even if it would be for a good cause, can still find himself motivated to stand up for the Resistance by Poe's true commitment to it. As well as the view when Captain Dameron walks away. God damn, son, I'd like to take a run in that trench if you know what I mean. Also, a romantic kiss between them might actually make some semblance of sense, rather than having absolutely no romantic tension built up beforehand and then being forgotten about in the next movie anyway. Actually, would probably have still been cut out of the next movie, but a boy can dream. Anyway, let's leave our gay fantasy land and return to a very heterosexual reality. Ugh. Finn and Rose get chucked in jail while looking for their codebreaker, and as luck would have it, they're in there with another codebreaker, big Benicio del Toro himself, who breaks them all out again. What a man. His character definitely has a name, and yet I will still be referring to him as Del Toro for the remainder of this video. Please submit your complaints to the nearest fire. Our heroes have a daring escape on the backs of the, let's call them f***ed-up horses for now. Del Toro accepts payment from Finn and Rose and agrees to break into the First Order ship with them. Then we get a speech from Del Toro, which I think often gets incorrectly interpreted as a major moral for this film. Finn is like, hey, I think it might be bad to sell weapons to fascists, maybe? And Del Toro's like, oh, but this guy's ship we stole sold weapons to the Resistance and the First Order, which means that all this fighting is pointless and you should never believe in anything. Good and bad are just made up words, and the best thing to do is just sit in the center and profit off conflict all you can. Now, what we must remember here, my friends, is that the guy who says this ends up betraying Finn and Rose to the First Order like 25 minutes later, all while profiting off the murders of quite a few Resistance members by letting the First Order know about Leia and Holdo's distraction plan. A centrist immediately capitulating to fascism instead of helping out those resisting it when the opportunity arises? Well, we're safe in the knowledge that that would never happen in real life. Vime aren't we?
You stupid.
Del Toro's betrayal is the final push Finn needs to believe wholly in the Resistance. When Del Toro tries to give him the "it's just business" line again, we get this.
It's just business. You're wrong. Maybe.
There's just a little crack in the facade there, maybe, an acknowledgement that Del Toro knows what he's doing is wrong but is quite simply too much of a coward to change his ways. It's both a glimpse of what Finn could have ended up as if he hadn't decided to stand up for something, and secondly, it's harkening back to Han Solo in A New Hope, the poster boy for "fuck you got mine" who wants nothing more to do with the fighting after his job is done. Which means, from our knowledge of previous Star Wars films, we expect Del Toro to come back and save our heroes, redeem himself, and maybe join the Resistance. But he doesn't. This is the last we ever see of him, and I really like that. Blockbuster media these days loves to give bad characters redemption arcs, and I think there are plots where there's a place for that, but I think it can be even more effective when those arcs fail to happen, and when we get to see what that reveals about the character and the themes of the film. Gee, I wonder if that applies to anyone else in this thing. Or maybe Del Toro was going to come back, but he got vaporized when Laura Dern went Holdo mode. Also, just to say here, it is so funny to me that Captain Phasma, having been forgotten about for almost this entire movie, shows up just to get her ass kicked by Finn and then dies. Like, that is her final death. She's not in the next one. Gwendolyn Christie clocks in, collected that paycheck, and immediately clocks out. What a character.
Change the world. My final message. Goodbye.
So yeah, all in all, I do think Finn's plot is stronger than Poe's, but I think it could have been stronger still if they were merged together, helping to parallel the ways that they're both learning to be revolutionaries, but from different angles, and that would have made for an overall better and more cohesive narrative. Anyway, let's talk about this loser with his hanging out. Or actually, we really have to talk about 3 different characters in this section, since their plots are all inseparably intertwined with each other, which is probably why this part of the movie is the strongest. The parallels drawn between Rey and Kylo are extremely deliberate. In both of their first scenes, they approach their respective masters with attempts to claim the dual legacies of Anakin Skywalker. Rey offers Anakin's old lightsaber to Luke, wanting him to train her in its use, and Kylo continues to LARP as Darth Vader like the little nerd he is. Both of them are openly mocked for attempting to do so. Luke tosses away his father's lightsaber right in front of Rey, and Kylo gets bullied by Andy Serkis like he's been scolded by his dad for wearing his Keep Calm and Allons-y shirt to Grandma's funeral. To be fair, if the First Order medics had done that much of a botch job on my lightsaber scar, I would be keeping the custom made helmet on all the time too. And yeah, that Luke moment is maybe a bit of a cheap gag, but I genuinely saw some people at the time ranting about how it disrespected the legacy of the franchise, like Luke cracked the thing over his knee, turned directly to the camera, and told you that everyone who's ever watched a Star Wars movie is going to hell. Which would of course be correct anyway. In my opinion, this line of thinking directly relates to the backlash towards how Luke behaves during the movie. There are so many fans unable to accept him as anything less than exactly who he was at the end of Return of the Jedi. When he says,
I think what? I'm gonna walk out with a laser sword and face down the whole First Order?
the answer for a depressingly large subset of the fandom is yes, that's really the only thing they showed up to this movie to see. Man, screw stuff like themes and character. I want Star Wars to be about my favourite heroes and villains smashing against each other like action figures. And also they'd be doing it loud enough to drown out the sounds of my parents' divorce. That's what Star Wars is all about. But I actually think this is yet another great, you guessed it, subversion from Rian Johnson. He once again refuses to be content with just playing the hits like The Force Awakens did. He wants to explore these characters as actual fallible people and not just icons existing solely on pedestals. Take the identity of Rey's parents too, who were clearly being set up by J.J. Abrams in the last movie as his usual brand of mystery box storytelling, but in this movie are revealed to be no one important at all, and I think this was the best decision Rian could have made here. It's almost like up until now, Rey was waiting for permission from the past to move forward, and in doing so was just doing a pale imitation of Anakin and Luke, but this revelation is part of what makes her realise that old masters can't guide her anymore. Only she can decide her future. Gee, I hope this isn't all undermined by any plot decisions in any future movies. That would really do my head in.
I were nobody.
You're his granddaughter. You are a Palpatine.
This all brings me quite nicely to another big misunderstanding I've often seen about what the movie is trying to say. Throughout the film, Rey and Kylo have several little forced Skype calls, further driving home the parallels between their character journeys. In one of these, Kylo says,
Let the past die. Kill it, if you have to. That's the only way to become what you were meant to be.
which I think quite a few people have taken away as like the chief moral of the movie for a few understandable reasons. For one, it does align with what I've been telling you about Last Jedi, its strong desire to break free of previous Star Wars convention. It was also one of the lines that got repeated in the trailers quite a lot and ended up getting memed along with our Wide King Ben Swolo. Finally, I think it's become quite common for antagonists in blockbuster films these days to make good points and then only still be the antagonist because their methods end up being too extreme. I literally made a whole video about how the MCU keeps doing this. So when Kylo says this and Rey has no immediate rebuttal, it can end up being interpreted as, My Chemical Romance just made a pretty good point actually. But it's clear that the movie doesn't think this is a valid point at all. For one thing, old Kelly Ben is a massive hypocrite. In what way is continuing to stalk around in all black and obsessing about Luke Skywalker letting the past die? Even when he takes action and kills the past, it may look like on the surface like he's pushing his life in a daring new direction, but actually he's just doing another imitation of what his granddad already did in Return of the Jedi. Anakin did that to save his son, and Kylo does this so he can try and recruit the girl he has a crush on into The Empire Part 2, The Empire Strikes Back. Part 2. If that wasn't obvious enough, Kylo ordering the First Order to stop attacking the Resistance base in the film's final battle just so he can get embarrassed by the forced projection of Luke is what makes him the biggest loser of the entire movie. He could have wiped out the New Rebellion then and there, but he was so laser focused on literally killing the past, which he still finds himself completely unable to do, that he lets the present, and by extension his future, slip away from him. So if let the past die isn't the main moral of the film, then what is? Ugh, I'm so confused. If only there was an ugly little rat who sat around in its dank little swamp all day to give me some advice. Unfortunately, I think you were busy that day, so let's see what Yoda thinks. After Rey leaves Luke to go and see Ben because I can fix him, I just know it, Master Skywalker goes to burn a tree containing ancient Jedi texts. And we get what I'd argue is the only real bit of fan service in the movie, a Force ghost of the original Puppet Yoda, not even the slightly off-putting CGI prequel one in all his glory. Luke hesitates in burning the tree, and so Yoda calls in a favour from Thor to do it instead. Luke tries to save the Jedi text but fails, and we see here that he's more like Kylo Ren than he cares to admit. He's also been talking about letting the past die, telling Rey that it's time for the Jedi to end, but is clearly still attached to the past enough to try and run into a burning tree to save some old Jedi books. And then we get, at least in my opinion, the actual moral of the film.
We are what they grow beyond.
You can't kill your past. It's always going to be a part of you, and trying to fight against that will just lead you to become obsessed with it. The only way to move forward is to accept all of the past as part of yourself and grow beyond it, as Luke and Rey learn to do. It would also have been nice if Poe and Finn did this too for a little more narrative cohesion, but hey ho, Space Film 8 is not perfect, yada yada yada. Kylo, meanwhile, is completely unable to move beyond the past, and like I said, it's what leads to him taking one of the fattest L's ever seen in the franchise. And I honestly think it's because of fans who are stuck in that sort of mindset that we got the Mach 1 backpedaling that was Rise of Skywalker. It's a movie that, like Kylo, wants to do something new by very pointedly killing the past, which just leads to it being stuck with a paper-thin plot barely kept above water by fan-pleasing cameos and a reversal of everything interesting about Last Jedi. Rise of Skywalker was not very well liked, but it still made over $1 billion because of course it did, and now in its wake it feels like Star Wars is splitting itself in two, like your mum when I come and visit her. I mean like in a David Cronenberg kind of way, like...
Did I ever tell you what the definition of insanity is?
On the one hand, you have shows like The Mandalorian and Kenobi, which, while still a lot better than Rise of Skywalker, are also pretty uninterested in exploring anything new. Whenever I see Star Wars going in this direction, I keep coming back to the final shot of The Last Jedi. This kid who Finn and Rose inspired hope in earlier with their resistance ring casually using the Force and looking off into the horizon in a classic Jedi pose. Under certain other Star Wars writers, this would be deliberate setup. Oh look everyone, it's little Johnny Kenobi. But it's actually the biggest subversion of all, the main point that the movie has been building towards the whole time. You don't have to be a Skywalker or a Kenobi or a f***ing Palpatine to be great in this universe. Luke will not be the last Jedi because anyone can be a Jedi. And that is the best moral that these films have ever come out with. Anyway, point being that I really hope Disney leans more into the Andor Last Jedi school of storytelling going forward. But knowing them, we'll probably be getting Lando Origins this time next year instead. Oh, for